Dear listeners, I have so much to tell you, and I often don't know where to start. It seems the world doesn't want to admit that sometimes we make mistakes, and that sometimes the wrong person gets punished for something they didn't do. Not all of us have been personally affected, but many of us have been impacted by this reality, and I feel like it's my responsibility to share these stories with you and to tell you what I've learned about wrongful convictions. I am so happy to have the chance to welcome Dr. Jan Canty back to join us this week on Wrongfully Yours. Last time we spoke about the human side of justice, specifically in relation to the grief of losing someone to violent crime. We spoke about the emotional parallels between homicide survivors and the wrongfully imprisoned, and we examined how assumptions, trauma, and healing shape both experiences. It was an intimate look into resilience, complicated grief, and what it means to rebuild after unimaginable loss. Today, we're going to continue this conversation because I think it's so important and because it's one that goes beyond legal analysis or systemic critique. Instead, it's one that focuses on the emotional terrain of grief, justice, and retribution. Seeing things from Jan's point of view helps to underscore just how deeply personal and polarizing these issues can be, especially when the pursuit of accountability feels like the only path to healing. It's a reminder that if we want to expand the public understanding of wrongful convictions, we also need to engage with the emotional narratives that shape people's willingness or unwillingness to hear these stories. So, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back. I appreciate it. I think that our two worlds do collide or overlap in ways that we can't anticipate. And I wanted to share with you a story that came out of one of my um, attendance at the network conference about 2 or 3 years ago. I went to one of the women's groups. And as you probably know, most women are put on who are wrongly convicted of homicide. It involves the death of a child. And I
Yes.
was listening intently to their stories, and I could not help but think about my daughter as they spoke. And because it fit the profile of somebody who would be likely wrongly convicted of homicide in this situation. My daughter is adopted. She's Black. She has, at that point in time, a 2-year-old with an undiagnosed brain tumor.
Oh,
And my granddaughter kept passing out, was hiding in closets with her hands over her head, rocking. And the doctors kept telling my daughter, oh, she's got a stomach ailment because she's throwing up. Well, fortunately, she went to see a nurse who did a head measurement and said, you need to go to Children's Hospital right now. Don't go home. Something is terribly wrong with your daughter's brain.
wow.
The short answer was that on the following morning, which was Thanksgiving, she had a very huge astrocytoma tumor removed from her brain. The surgeon said to my daughter, had this surgery not occurred, now in 2 weeks she would have died in her sleep from asphyxiation
Oh
because
my
it was
goodness.
pressing against her breathing part of her brain, the brain stem, and it regulates breathing. And because my granddaughter had been falling a lot, she had bruises all over her. So picture that. My daughter finds her dead in her crib. She's a minority. She's got bruises on her body, and she looks like she might have been suffocated. And I went up to one of the participants, the women, at the panel discussion afterwards, and I told them this scenario. And I said, am I like overreacting? Or is this indeed one of those situations that could end up being in your shoes? She said, it is like a poster child case.
I was going to say that's almost textbook, honestly. And it is so eerily reminiscent of one of our Canadian women exonerees who's a good friend of mine now, but it was her stepdaughter and she died of an undiagnosed medical condition and she ended up being convicted and serving time for a homicide that was not a homicide. And that's the thing about the women exonerees is that over 70% of them are convicted of phantom crimes. They're convicted of things that are not even a crime,
Crime.
right? Like there's women who's a really great friend of mine. She was wrongfully convicted of arson and the death of her 3-year-old son in the house fire. She served almost 17 years until finally somebody realized, oh, it was an accidental fire from faulty wiring.
Oh,
And just so many women. I just wrote a chapter for a book about women and mothers, wrongfully convicted mothers. It's like we talked about last time. It's this rush to judgment. It's this wanting to have somebody held accountable. And for so many people, having a guilty verdict equals justice.
yes, yes.
And they don't think about whether the two are actually properly aligned.
No,
The guilty verdict is justice at the end of the day,
right.
sadly, right? And um you know, I guess that's part of why I am so vested in doing this work and trying to get the word out, because there's so many stories that we don't hear about, right?
Mhm.
And I know your podcast gives voice to people whose stories are often ignored. And again, that's what I'm trying to shed light on as well. And so I guess in your experience in sharing these stories, because you said it's been 6 years now that you're doing your podcast?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, so you've shared a number of stories. Do you think that what we're doing is an effective way to help shift public opinion on these larger issues?
I think it's a start. It's like throwing a pebble in a lake, you hope it reaches. I am now heard in 22 countries,
Wow.
and I do get positive feedback from different places in the world. Now, whether that means that that then translates to attorneys and the legal system, I can't say. But
Sure.
some of the people who've commented on it have been part of the legal system,
Oh,
and it has impacted them. Not enough, but I mean, there's very few of them, but they do listen. And I have made network connections with people like that and talked to them. And, you just never know how long it's going to take or who's open to feedback and change given the confines of their job. But it's a start. At least I have that, I can say with confidence.
yeah, and it's true. It's a hard conversation to have, especially when you're so entrenched in a system that basically indoctrinates you to think a certain way, to act a certain way, and then, to have somebody saying, "Don't forget about these people and don't forget about those people," and they're saying, "No, there's not a form for that. I don't know what checkbox they fit into here," and
And that's I think it's so important that wrongly convicted or homicide survivors go and speak to law classes when their minds are not that tight. And I think a personal story goes a long, long way. It won't be easily forgotten compared to a statistic.
100%. I mean, I teach an undergraduate class on wrongful convictions, and I spend the first 8 weeks of the term going over all the things that can possibly go wrong. And students think, wow, this is really interesting, and I never thought of this and whatnot. And then I'll bring in exonerees for 2 or 3
Oh,
weeks
oh,
because they then tell the real life story of everything that I just talked about for 8 weeks. And I mean, these students are in the final year of their bachelor's degrees. They're going out, they're probably going to be the future of our criminal justice system. And every year I've been teaching for 10 years, and every year at the end of the semester, they say, I will never forget Christine's message. I will never forget Jamie's message, Maria's message, Floyd's, whoever it may be, right? It's just that will stay with me forever
yes.
because, it's one thing, like you say, to talk about stats and to read about these cases in a textbook. It's another to have them in front of you.
It totally is.
And it hits you completely differently.
At the last Innocence Project Network conference, which was in Seattle. I brought my daughter, and that's because she just finished her degree in social work, and she's been working in a prison setting, and I'm trying to steer her to work with the wrongly convicted. I said, "Why work with the rightly convicted?" I said, "I want to expose you to this." And it made an impression on her. And to your point, some of the biggest impressions on her were those unplanned but wonderful conversations that she happened to get into outside of the lecture halls in the hallways at over lunch. Stuff which I have heard her tell her friends about. And I think that's how we make a difference is we get them young, we bring in the first person accounts, then show them the data and back it up with proof and I think it'll stick with them. The other way is if it happens to lawmakers, families themselves.
Yes. Yes. I mean, then that becomes a whole new
It's an eye
conversation.
opener. Yeah.
I mean, and this is what I always say about wrongful convictions too, is so much of the public perception. And to be honest, before I got into researching and working in the field like I do, I thought, that happens to everyone else. That's not something that's going to happen to me. It happens to everyone else. And it took me a really long time to realize that to everyone else, I am everyone else.
Mhm.
And so no one's immune. It can happen to anyone. And I really love your point. It's really interesting that you're talking about get them young because that's what can make the difference. I just had a conversation with Mark Beach, who's the
Oh,
director of the wrongful conviction awareness and avoidance program in Illinois. And he trains the new police recruits across the state of Illinois. So it's become state mandated that
oh,
every
wow.
new recruit gets his wrongful
Wow.
convictions course. And we were just talking about how at one of his sessions, there was a veteran police officer who sat in on the class. And afterwards, he went to Mark and he said, I really think you're missing the point. He's like, this was super impactful, super important, really great.
But
But I think you're missing the point. You need to be giving this to the veteran officers because these new recruits aren't really going to be doing a whole lot of on the ground work for
ah,
some time. And Mark said, you know what? I don't disagree with you that this needs to also be given to the veteran officers. He's like, but what I do disagree with you is that we need to build the foundation by reaching this young group and instilling this in their initial training. Like this is their welcome to the police force training. You're setting a good foundation and making them aware of things that I'm sure the veteran officers weren't aware of for a really long time, right?
and by reaching that core group, you may find that I'm going to pull this out of my hat 10% of them end up not going into police work, but maybe they go into law or teaching or some other vocation. They still have that in their back pocket and they can train others.
Exactly. And that's just it. It's like you need to have that foundation. And if we can start to, the thing is too, I firmly believe a big part of it is changing the culture, right? That there's this, um, I don't know, resistance to admitting that wrongful convictions are even possible, that it's even a thing that
Yes.
happens in our
Yeah.
justice system.
Right.
So if you train these officers before they're even out on the road to know that this is a thing, then that's inevitably going to shift, change the culture, right? Like they're
And I think the public needs to understand that anybody can be caught up in that. Anybody.
yes,
I don't care how much money you got, how much education you are, where you live, who's your relative, what kind of people you have that can help you. Nobody's immune.
that that's it. And that's the sad reality at the end of the day. Absolutely. No one's immune.
There was
And
a famous case of one of the Kennedy nephews of uh, of Edith Kennedy, who was convicted of a crime he didn't do in the murder of his niece. He was eventually exonerated, but he was a Kennedy and he got wrongfully convicted. So,
yeah,
what's that say for the rest of us?
that's it. When you talk about how much money and, clout and whatever else, if a Kennedy can have
Hmm.
this happen to them, then it's certainly leaves questions as to the rest of us. And then I guess the flip side of that is it certainly answers how it happens to people like Jeff Deskovic and, the countless other
Like
people
Melissa
who,
Lucio, who's on death row
yes,
for 20 something years.
yes. And, that there's so many, sadly, that we could just start naming off names. But yeah, it happens, and it happens far more often than we like to think about. Um, so with that, I mean, I think a big part of it too is that we being the general public, society, call it what you will, we need to do better in acknowledging and addressing the hurt, the harm, the trauma that comes from experiences with the justice system. And despite what the assumptions are, as we talked about last time, how can we better assist you and not even homicide survivors, but like justice system survivors? How do you think we can do better in acknowledging and addressing that pain and helping people to navigate it better?
I think there are three ways. One is through peer support. Another way is the evolution of a new specialty within law called crime victim law, which is just
Mm,
starting. Rachel Robinson of Colorado is instrumental in getting that off the ground. She was a prosecuting attorney, and she saw how often the victims' rights were getting trampled in court. So she put it out there, and now she defends crime victims in court in their own cases to make sure that their rights are upheld.
ah,
And she would love to write a textbook on that and bring it into the law school itself. I think
sure.
that's an avenue that needs to be explored. And the third way is just, I don't want to sound too judgmental here, but we need to look at the public's role in this. Specifically, what I mean by that is the public, I think, shares the blame because they champion becoming down hard on crime, pushing the DA to arrest, convict, and take care of crime. And hence the DA does just that. That's their job. Their job is to get a conviction at all costs almost. And we go, yay. And at the end of the day, truth and justice will persevere. Instead of saying do a fair job, not put everybody that comes into your courtroom behind bars. And it bothers me a great deal that there is this uh, prosecutorial privilege where they cannot be legally held for many of the, as I see it, crimes that they do in their role of carrying out justice, like hiding evidence, or like in this case of Melissa Lucio, it was clear as day what had gone wrong, but nobody, I mean, judges are behind her release, former FBI are behind her release, senators and so on, and the DA won't budge and nobody can make him. And that's just not right.
Yep. Yep. Well, I mean, and then similarly, there's the Robert Roberson case in Texas right now that, there was this unheard of bipartisan stance that, they're telling the governor, like, this guy didn't do it. You need to let him out. And he's still on death row.
Yep.
Right? You're absolutely true. And I don't think it comes across as judgmental because it's one of the things I teach about is that the public pressure in cases of wrongful conviction is one of the most significant contributing factors, right? Because it permeates everything and everybody feeds off of this frenzy that
Hmm.
the community has. And it goes back to people thinking that guilty equals justice, and so we become bloodthirsty and want to see a conviction.
And if you can't reach the public on moral grounds, you can remind them how many tax dollars are being wasted to house these people who for something they didn't do.
Absolutely. I hear it from my students all the time where it's just, it costs so much more money to have these people housed in prison and going through the appeals. And then, if there's compensation or whatever else may be the case, right? And it's just, like you say, let's do it right the first time.
One of the things that I wish the courts would do is, as a matter of course, every single person who's put on trial for a murder gets a DNA analysis done right out of the
Mhm.
gate. That would be a drop in the bucket cost-wise to even housing the wrongly convicted for a month, let alone
Absolutely.
20
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. Which you're going to end up having probably to do that DNA analysis 20 years down the road anyways to
Right,
get the
right,
person exonerated. So let's just
right,
skip the 20 years
right.
of wrongful imprisonment, right? I'm sure there's people who would argue privacy rights but in terms of preventing someone from spending decades potentially in prison
Mhm,
wrongfully.
mhm. And I think most people that are innocent wouldn't fight it.
Sure. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. I think again, my goodness, we're just about at time here. And I cannot thank you enough. This has been, again, such a great conversation.
You are
And
welcome.
I really love seeing how wrongful convictions just kind of spill into different areas that don't necessarily strike us immediately as being connected. And here we are.
Yep,
So,
yep,
again, thank you so much for your time. And I
yep,
really
yep.
appreciate it. And everyone will just give again a little pitch um, to your podcast. It is called,
Domino effect of murder.
and we can get it.
It's everywhere.
There we
It's
go.
the platform itself is the Mental Health News Radio Network, but it can be found on any, Apple, whatever,
Perfect.
iHeart.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Jan Candy for joining me again this week as we spoke about visibility and the power of storytelling in the justice system. With her insight, we were given a unique opportunity to explore what it means to be heard, whether you're a family member of a murder victim or someone who's been wrongfully convicted, and how trauma shapes those experiences. Our conversation was a reminder for me that as a public figure, I have a responsibility to be an ethical storyteller. While I work to share stories of pain, injustice, and hope, I always have to be mindful that I have a responsibility to ensure that I don't usurp the voices of those I'm trying to elevate. And I have to remember that when done with the best intentions and for the right reasons, this work can help to reshape our collective understanding of justice itself. Speaking with Jan reminds me that wrongful convictions affect us in so many ways. Sometimes the effect may not be obvious, but it's there. And these voices allow us to appreciate the impact through other lenses. Wrongful convictions don't just affect the exoneree. If we're open to their reality, their parallels can be seen just about anywhere. And while today's letter may have piqued your interest, this is only part of the story. There's still so much more to tell. The effects of wrongful convictions are far reaching. They touch us all. I'll write to you again soon as I continue my conversations with those whose lives have been impacted by a wrongful conviction. But until then, I remain wrongfully yours. If you have something that you want to talk about with me, or even if you want to just send me some words of encouragement, you can drop me a line at wrongfullyyourspodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out my website, kellylozon.ca, for more information about me and the kinds of things that I do. And so, if you were touched by this episode, please consider sharing it with others, liking and following the podcast on your favorite platform so you don't miss what comes next. And as always, thank you for listening to Wrongfully Yours, where we believe that telling these stories is the first step towards preventing the next injustice. And until next time, stay curious, stay hopeful, and keep fighting for justice.